They called her the human mistake, a fragile princess sent to a monster's court as tribute. But when the Wolf King touched her hand, his curse nearly tore them both apart. What no one knew, she was the only one who could break it. Tonight, we enter a world where love defies bloodlines, pain hides behind power, and one girl's compassion could save, or destroy, an entire kingdom. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It came in sheets, relentless and cold, soaking the flags on the palace walls until they hung limp like mourning veils. Princess Leary of Arkenvale stood on the balcony, her pale hands gripping the stone rail. Below her, the courtyard swarmed with wolves in human form, shifter soldiers with sharp eyes and movements so smooth they seemed choreographed by instinct itself. She could always tell who was a wolf and who wasn't. Wolves moved like they belonged to the world. Humans pretended. And Leary was the best pretender of them all. Her father's kingdom had been born from the uneasy union of man and beast. Her mother, a noble wolf from the north, had married for peace, not love. But the peace had failed, and so had the marriage. When Leary had been born, a child without a wolf, a girl who never shifted under the moon, her existence was deemed a political misstep, a symbol of weakness. Her older brother, Darian, had inherited their mother's gift easily. His wolf was obsidian black, massive, and terrifyingly fast. He had been everything a shifter prince should be. Leary, meanwhile, had been everything a wolf kingdom feared, human, fragile, and utterly ordinary. And now, she was a bargaining chip. The throne room doors creaked open behind her. She didn't turn. She knew the cadence of those footsteps, her father's, heavy with guilt, pride, and exhaustion. "The council has decided," he said. Her voice came out small. "Decided what?" "That the treaty with the North demands tribute." He paused, his tone softening only slightly. "The Wolf King has agreed to accept you as his bride." The word bride struck like a blade. Not a gift, not a guest, a tribute. "The Wolf King," she whispered, tasting the name. "King Kalen?" Her father nodded grimly. "The same. The Alpha of the Frostmark Dominion. He commands the largest pack on the continent. If we are to survive the famine and raids." "You're giving me to a man they call the Beast of the North," she cut in, her voice trembling. He didn't deny it. Kalen Frostmark, half myth, half nightmare. Stories painted him as a king who ruled with his claws, whose wolf was so wild he'd stopped shifting back completely. Some said he was cursed. Others said his wolf had gone mad and devoured his soul. No one knew the truth, only that no one crossed him twice. Her father turned away, as if unable to meet her eyes. "You are the only one they will take. The only one they will take. Not the beloved daughter. Not the diplomat. The spare." Leary's throat burned, but she bowed her head, forcing herself to remain still. "Then I'll go." Later that evening, the rain slowed to a mist. Leary walked through the servants' corridor carrying a small bundle, the few possessions she was allowed to take. Her footsteps echoed softly against the damp stone. She heard a yelp from ahead. A young boy had tripped, spilling a basket of linens. He scrambled to gather them, clutching his wrist in pain. "Let me see," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "It's nothing, Your Highness." But his wrist was swelling already. Without thinking, she took his small hand in hers. A warmth spread through her chest, slow and steady, and the trembling in his arm eased. His eyes went wide. "It doesn't hurt anymore." She smiled faintly, though she knew the swelling hadn't gone. "Good. Don't climb those stairs again." The boy scurried off, clutching the basket like a shield. Leary watched him go, her pulse still quick. That strange calm had always been with her, a way to feel the pain of others and soften it, just for a moment. Her mother had once called it a gentle weakness, a useless gift in a land of claws. But tonight, as the thunder rumbled in the distance, she wondered if it might be the only thing she had left. The next morning, the carriage arrived, black and silver, drawn by direwolves the size of horses. Her brother stood at the gate, silent, his jaw tight. "Leary," he murmured. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted softly. If it keeps our people from starving, I'll go. She climbed into the carriage before he could answer. The journey north was long and wordless. The air grew colder, the forests darker, the silence heavier. By the time they reached the Frostmark border, snow had begun to fall, each flake like a whisper of warning. When the great gates opened before her, revealing the fortress of the Wolf King, black stone, jagged towers, and banners that bled into the storm, she felt the weight of every whispered story settle on her chest. This is where the monsters live, and she was about to marry their king. The gates of Frostmark Fortress loomed like the jaws of a sleeping giant. They opened with a groan that vibrated through Leary's bones, revealing a courtyard dusted in snow and guarded by wolves larger than any she had ever seen. Some stood on two legs, armored and silent. Others padded between them in their true forms, eyes glinting amber in the twilight. Her carriage stopped before a flight of steps that climbed to a set of massive iron doors. A figure awaited her at the top, tall, silver-haired, with eyes like cold steel and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. "I am Commander Erend, Beta to King Kalen," he said, voice low and gravel-edged. "You will address me as Lord Erend within the court." Leary inclined her head. "Your Majesty's court, or his prison?" Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps surprise, but it vanished too quickly to be certain. "That depends on whether you can tell the difference." He turned sharply.
Come.
"The king waits." Inside, the fortress was a cathedral of shadow and firelight. The walls were carved from obsidian stones streaked with veins of crystal that caught the torchlight and made the air shimmer faintly blue. Banners bearing the sigil of Frostmark, a black wolf devouring a silver moon, hung heavy in the silence. The further they walked, the more Leary felt it, an invisible pressure that prickled against her skin, like static before lightning. The wolves here were not ordinary shifters. Their power thrummed in the air, thick and alive. She could feel their suspicion, their hunger, their curiosity. At the end of the hall, two guards pushed open the throne room doors. The room beyond swallowed sound. It was vast and dim, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. And at its center, on a throne of blackened iron and carved bone, sat King Kalen Frostmark. He did not look up immediately. His attention was on a map spread across his lap, one hand resting on the hilt of the blade beside him. His hair, black as a raven's wing, fell loose around a face too sharp to be handsome, a sculpture of strength and restraint. But it was his eyes that rooted her to the spot. They were storm gray, shot through with streaks of pale silver, and they saw everything. When he finally looked at her, she felt as though her soul had been laid bare. "So," he said quietly, his voice more dangerous for its calm, "this is the tribute the South sends me." Leary bowed stiffly. "Princess Leary of Arkenvale, Your Majesty." "A princess," he echoed. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "And human." The way he said human was not insulting, merely factual, but it still cut. "I did not request a wife of your kind. I didn't request a husband who murders his enemies," she replied before she could stop herself. Erend inhaled sharply. The hall went still. Kalen's eyes, cold and unreadable, fixed on her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You have a tongue sharper than I expected. Would you rather I wagged it in fear?" "Fear is the beginning of wisdom," he murmured, rising slowly from the throne. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered, power coiled beneath his stillness. He moved like a storm contained in flesh. When he stepped close enough for her to see the faint scars that traced his neck and jaw, she realized the stories had not exaggerated his ferocity. "Understand this, princess," he said softly. "You were sent here to seal peace, not to provoke war. You will stay in the Frostmark wing. You will speak only when addressed. And you will never, ever, set foot beyond the inner courtyard without my leave." Leary's voice was barely a whisper. "Am I your bride or your prisoner?" He leaned closer, the faint scent of frost and steel surrounding him. "Both." Then he turned away. "Errand. See that she is kept safe." The word safe sounded like a threat. Her chambers were grand enough to shame a queen, but cold as a crypt. Frost clung to the windows, and the fire in the hearth seemed to burn only for show. The tapestries depicted wolves in endless battle against humans, dragons, even one another. Errand lingered by the door. "You'll find the king prefers solitude. Do not mistake his silence for mercy." "What should I mistake it for? A warning." Then he was gone. Leary stood alone in the great empty room, listening to the echo of her own heartbeat. She was not sure what frightened her more, the cruelty in the king's reputation or the hollow calm she'd seen in his eyes. Somehow, she knew that calm was only the surface of something much darker. That night, she could not sleep. The storm outside rattled the windows, but beneath it, she thought she heard something else, a sound that did not belong to wind or rain. A low, guttural growl. A sound of something in pain. It came from the wall adjoining her chambers. Her hand hovered over the cold stone. The noise rose again, half growl, half cry. She closed her eyes and listened, and in the trembling silence between those sounds, she felt it. The same strange pull she had felt when she healed the servant boy. The same echo of pain. Only this time, it wasn't hers. And it was coming from the king. The sound came again, deeper now, ragged and raw. Not the kind of pain that belonged to wounds or battle. This was something older, crueler, and constant. Leary's hand pressed flat against the wall that divided her chamber from the king's. The vibrations pulsed through her fingertips like a living heartbeat. A shiver traced her spine, and before she could think better of it, she moved. The corridor beyond her door was dim, torches guttering in the drafts that crept down from the mountains. She wrapped herself in a cloak and padded silently past the guard stations. They were empty, abandoned, as though no one dared to stand watch near the king's private hall. The growls became clearer with each step. Sometimes they broke into half-words, syllables shaped by a voice fighting to stay human. "Go, leave me." She found the great iron doors of the royal chambers cracked open. The torchlight within flickered violently. Leary hesitated only a heartbeat before pushing through. What she saw inside drove the breath from her lungs. Kalen Frostmark, the Wolf King, was on his knees before the fire, his body convulsing with tremors that looked like they might tear him apart. His hands clawed into the flagstones so hard that blood streaked between his fingers. Black veins crawled up his arms, pulsing with an unnatural light. "Your Majesty," her voice was barely a whisper. He jerked his head up, eyes wild, silver flashing through the storm gray. For a moment, he didn't see her at all. He saw through her, through everything, to whatever monster howled inside him. "Get out," he snarled. Leary froze, but the sight of him, the proud king reduced to a trembling ruin, broke something in her fear. She stepped forward. "I can help." "You can't." He slammed a fist into the floor, stone cracking under his strength. "No one can. It feeds on me. It is me." She ignored the warning and knelt beside him. The air around him shimmered with heat and power, making her skin sting. Still, she reached out and pressed her hand against a shoulder. The moment they touched, agony ripped through her. Not physical, but something deeper. His pain was everywhere, burning in his veins, clawing through his bones, screaming in the cage of a soul. It was endless torment bound inside flesh. But beneath the suffering, she felt something else. A pulse of life, trapped and desperate to be free.
She focused on that.
Her breath steadied, her heartbeat slowed, and the strange calm, the same quiet power she'd always carried, rose like a tide within her. She didn't try to fight the darkness she felt in him. She simply surrounded it, softened it, as though covering a wound with warmth instead of pressure. Kalen's body went still. The black veins dulled. The air stopped burning. He stared at her, eyes wide, chest heaving. "What did you do?" "I don't know," she said softly. "I just listened." He blinked, the words not making sense to him. Slowly, the tremors in his arms ceased. He drew in a breath that didn't shake. It was the first he'd taken in years that didn't taste of agony. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, as if remembering himself, he pushed her hand away, not violently, but with the fragile caution of a man afraid of hope. You should not have come here. Should I have let you die alone? He turned his face from her, the firelight carving harsh lines across his features. You don't understand what I am, princess. This is not sickness. It's punishment. Punishment for what? For surviving. The bitterness in his voice was so heavy it frightened her more than the growls had. He stood slowly, gathering the shredded remnants of his composure like armor. Leave now. Forget what you saw. No one must know. Then, at least let me go. His roar shook the room. She stumbled back, cloak billowing, but his eyes, though fierce, weren't cruel. They were terrified. Not of her, but for her. Leary fled into the corridor. That night, she dreamed of wolves made of smoke and bone, of a man bound in chains of moonlight, howling for release. When she woke, her hands still tingled with the echo of his pain. She knew she should have been afraid. Instead, she felt a dangerous pull. The Wolf King was cursed, yes, but not broken. Not yet. And the thing inside her that soothed and calmed what others could not, whatever it was, it answered his suffering like two halves of the same chord. Somehow, she knew she would go to him again. The next evening she did. Errand caught her at the door this time, his expression grim. He does not wish to be disturbed. Then tell him to lock his doors. The beta's mouth twitched, part warning, part reluctant admiration. You are bold for one so small. I'm tired of being small. Inside, Kalen sat by the fire, bruised shadows under his eyes, shirt half unbuttoned, revealing faint traces of those black veins beneath his skin. You again, he said flatly. Leary moved to the hearth and sank to her knees beside him. If you're going to order me to leave, you'll have to get up and make me. He stared at her for a long time, disbelief flickering into something more dangerous, respect. Do you think I'm a beast that needs taming? No, she murmured. I think you're a man who's forgotten how to stop fighting himself. He laughed once, softly. And you think you can remind me? I don't know, she admitted, but I'm going to try. They stayed like that until the fire burned low. He didn't speak again, and she didn't push him to. When his pain surged, she touched his arm, and the storm inside him quieted, just enough for him to breathe. When dawn crept through the frozen windows, Kalen realized something impossible. For the first time in years, he had slept. And somewhere deep within the cursed bond that tied his wolf in chains, a faint spark of warmth flickered to life. For weeks, the pattern repeated. By day, Leary was a silent shadow among the wolves, the fragile human princess whose presence the courtiers mocked behind their hands. By night, she crossed the forbidden corridor to the king's chambers, where she laid her hands on him and drew the agony from his veins like poison from a wound. She learned quickly that the curse was alive. It flared when he was angry, when his control slipped, when his wolf tried to rise and was beaten back by invisible chains. Every session left them both shaken and pale, yet each time, the darkness receded a little more. Kalen never thanked her, but he began to speak. At first, it was only fragments, the names of his fallen, the cold wars that had bled his people dry. But eventually, he told her the truth. It was a witch, he said one night, voice low and ragged. A blood conjurer from the southern wastes. During the Unification Wars, she cursed me with my own power. She bound my wolf to pain. The more I resist, the stronger it becomes. Leary's fingers traced the faint black lines along his forearm, pulsing gently under her touch. And you've been fighting it all this time? I am the Alpha, he said, almost bitterly. An Alpha does not yield. But an Alpha who cannot rest is no king at all, she murmured. He looked at her, eyes shadowed by the firelight. You should hate me. I've killed your mother's people. I have conquered lands your father once called allies. Leary met his gaze steadily. I'm not my mother. I'm not my father. She took his trembling hand in hers. And you are not a monster. He flinched, as though the word burned. But he didn't pull away. The The fortress, however, was a living thing. It saw everything, heard everything. Whispers began in the servants' quarters, the king's chamber lit late into the night, the scent of human perfume where only frost and steel should linger. By the time the gossip reached the council hall, the story had sharpened its claws. The king takes his human toy to his bed. One lord sneered. A pity if it's true. I had hoped our alpha would sire wolves, not pets. Lord Careth, the king's uncle, let them talk. He was a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He'd watched Kaelin's rule with patient contempt for years, waiting for weakness to show itself. When he spoke, his tone was smooth, almost kind. A man cursed for so long finds strange comforts. But comfort breeds softness. The North cannot afford a soft alpha. The other wolves murmured agreement. Careth leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming like a predator's. If the king forgets his duty, it will be our duty to remind him. Lyri sensed the tension growing long before anyone dared confront her. Servants stopped meeting her gaze. Courtiers stepped aside as she walked, not out of respect but revulsion. Still, she found herself changing. The cold didn't bite as deeply. The fear that had once kept her silent had turned into something else, a quiet defiance. When Erend met her in the corridor one morning, his expression unreadable, she braced herself.
They're talking, he said.
The court. They say you've bewitched him. I suppose it's easier to believe in witchcraft than in kindness. Erend studied her, a flicker of something like admiration in his gray eyes. Kindness is rare here. Dangerous, even. Then perhaps it's what this kingdom needs most. He almost smiled. Be careful, princess. You're changing things. That evening, she found Kaelin waiting for her in the council chamber instead of the privacy of his room. He sat at the long table, hands clasped, gaze fixed on the roaring hearth. I hear my court has begun to invent stories about us, he said without looking up. I'm sure they invent many things to keep themselves entertained. Do they amuse you? Lyri crossed the room and stopped beside him.
No.
But neither do they scare me. He finally looked at her, really looked. His eyes, once cold steel, had softened into something closer to stormlight. You should be frightened, Lyri. You're human in a den of wolves. And yet here I am. He rose, stepping closer until the heat of him pressed against her skin. You have no idea what they would do if they thought you mattered to me. Her breath caught.
Doi.
His silence was answer enough. For one suspended moment, the air between them crackled like lightning about to strike. Then he turned away, fists clenched. You should leave before I forget myself. Maybe forgetting yourself is the only way you'll ever be free, she whispered. He didn't answer, and that, she thought, was worse than anger. When she returned to her chambers that night, her reflection startled her. There was fire in her eyes where once there had been only fear. But far below her window, in the dark of the courtyard, she caught a glimpse of movement. 2 wolves standing in the snow, watching her window in perfect stillness. And though they vanished when she blinked, the unease they left behind told her that Careth's patience was coming to an end. The next full moon hung low and cold over Frostmark Fortress, its light spilling silver across the mountain peaks like spilled mercury. It should have been a night of celebration, the wolves' monthly hunt, but tension coiled beneath the surface like a drawn bowstring. The great hall was crowded. Lords and their mates filled the long tables, laughter forced, eyes wary. At the head sat King Kaelin, his expression carved in stone. To his right, the chair reserved for his queen remained empty, as it always did. Until now, the herald's voice carried through the hush. Princess Lyri of Arkenvale, consort to the crown. A collective intake of breath rippled across the room. Lyri entered wearing a gown of silver-gray velvet that shimmered like moonlight. She had refused to hide in her chambers while they whispered. Tonight, she would face them. Her heart pounded as she crossed the floor, every step echoing louder than it should. Kaelin's gaze met hers, unreadable, a flicker of warning in his eyes. But he didn't stop her. She took her place at his side, chin high, defiance wrapped in silk. Lord Careth rose from his seat at the opposite end of the table, cup in hand, his smile sharp as glass. "A brave sight, is it not?" he said to the room. "The Alpha King and his delicate prize from the south." Murmurs rippled through the hall like wind through dry grass. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Careth." "I mean no disrespect, your majesty," Careth said smoothly, though every word was a barb. "It is simply curious. We wolves choose our mates through the bond of the soul, through power that calls to power. Yet our king chooses a human." The insult landed with precision. The room went still. Lyri's fingers tightened around the goblet in front of her. She could feel the faint hum of Kaelin's pain flaring through their strange connection, the curse agitated by anger. The black veins beneath his skin stirred. She leaned slightly toward him. "He's baiting you," she whispered. "I know," he murmured back. And yet, his voice roughened. "The wolf inside me wants blood." Careth raised his glass higher, his tone mocking. "Tell us, princess, what strength do you bring our king?
Can you shift? Can you hunt?
Or do you simply warm his bed?" Gasps broke around the table. Kaelin surged to his feet, so fast the air shuddered. "Enough," he said. The word cracked like a whip. But Careth only smiled wider. "I ask what every loyal wolf wonders. What claim has this frail human to stand beside the alpha of Frostmark?" The black lines were already creeping along Kaelin's neck. His eyes flickered silver-white, the cursed wolf clawing against its chains. Lyri felt his pulse like thunder in her own veins. She stood, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "The same claim every wolf in this hall makes," she said. "Loyalty. Courage. A will to protect those I care for." Careth's lip curled. Pretty words from soft lips. Lyri took a step forward. "Would you test them?" The laughter that followed was derisive, but it faltered when Kaelin's growl rolled through the chamber, deep and primal. "You forget yourself, uncle," he said. "You stand in my hall and question my right to rule, to choose." Careth met his gaze without fear. "I question nothing but your strength, Kaelin. You hide behind shadows, behind pain, behind this human girl. Perhaps you are no longer fit to lead." The words struck like claws. Something inside Kaelin broke. The air filled with a sudden, unbearable pressure, power radiating from the king like a storm unleashed. The torches dimmed. The hall trembled. Every wolf present felt it in their bones, the alpha's fury, vast and wild. Lyri moved before she could think, stepping between them. Her hand touched Kaelin's arm, and the burning heat that coursed through him seared her palm. The curse roared inside him, threatening to devour everything. "Kaelin," she whispered, "look at me." His eyes blazed, half man, half wolf, the storm raging behind them. But her voice pierced through the chaos. "You're not what he says," she said. "You're not your curse. You're my king." The words snapped something. The darkness recoiled, confused. His breath came ragged, but the light in his eyes dimmed to human once more. The black veins pulsing beneath his skin retreated. A stunned silence filled the hall. Careth's face twisted. "Witchcraft." "No," Kaelin said, voice low, trembling with restrained power. "Bond." He turned to the gathered court. "Let every wolf here hear me now. This woman stands under my protection, by my word, by my blood, by my soul. Any who question her, question me." The command in his tone was absolute. Even those who hated her dropped their eyes in submission. Kaelin looked at Careth. "If you wish to challenge me, do so in the ring. Otherwise, leave before I forget mercy." Careth bowed stiffly, hatred flickering beneath his smile. "As you command, my king." He left the hall, his wolves slinking after him. But Lyri knew what that look meant. He wasn't finished. Later that night, the corridors were quiet again. Lyri sat by the fire in Kaelin's chambers, his hand resting limply in hers. He was pale, sweat beading along his temples. "You stopped me," he murmured. "No one's ever stopped me before." "You stopped yourself," she corrected softly. "I just reminded you who you are." He gave a weak, wry smile. You shouldn't have to save your king. Maybe it's time someone did. He stared at her then, eyes full of things unspoken, gratitude, fear, longing. The space between them dissolved as he leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. For a moment, neither of them breathed. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You are the only thing that doesn't hurt. But outside the chamber, in the frost-dark shadows, Kareth listened. His smile was thin as a knife. If the human girl could calm the beast, then she held the leash to Frostmark itself.
And that meant she would have to die.
Snow fell in delicate spirals that morning, softening the edges of Frostmark's grim towers. To anyone looking from afar, the fortress seemed peaceful, untouched by the venom that brewed within. But peace in the north was only ever an illusion. Inside the great hall, preparations were underway for the midwinter feast. Long tables were set with silver platters, evergreen garlands, and candles that filled the air with a faint scent of pine and smoke. It was a night meant to mark renewal, the promise of light returning after the long darkness. For Lyri, it was the first time she had been allowed to stand beside Kaelin publicly since the confrontation with Kareth. The court had been forced to accept her place, but the weight of their stares still pressed on her like a physical thing. Kaelin's voice was calm as he greeted each noble, but she felt the tension thrumming under his skin. His hand brushed hers beneath the table, a brief touch, grounding and protective. They'll test you again tonight, he murmured, eyes scanning the room. They always do. She offered a faint smile. Then let them. They'll find I've learned from the best. His answering look was fleeting but warm, gone before anyone else could notice. Lord Kareth arrived late, draped in furs blacker than the snowstorm behind him. His smile was easy, his bow impeccable. Only the glint in his eyes betrayed his intent. My king, he said smoothly, forgive my tardiness. I wish to bring a small token from the Western Pax, a symbol of renewed loyalty. He gestured to a servant, who carried forward a polished silver carafe and 2 goblets etched with the Frostmark sigil. From our vineyards, Kareth continued, a winter wine distilled beneath the full moon, potent enough to warm even the coldest night. Kaelin's gaze lingered on him for a long, silent beat. Generous of you. He gestured to pour. The servant filled the goblets, one for the king, one for Lyri. The liquid shimmered faintly violet under the torchlight. Lyri lifted the cup, but Kaelin's hand shot out, catching her wrist. No, he said quietly. I'll taste it first. Your Majesty, she protested, but his tone left no room for argument. He took a small sip. The hall held its breath. Then he smiled faintly and nodded.
Sweet, he said.
Almost too sweet. Kareth inclined his head. The vineyards overcompensate for the frost, I fear. Kaelin handed the goblet to Lyri. Now it's safe. She drank, only a mouthful, enough to be polite, before setting the cup aside. The taste was indeed sweet, almost cloying, leaving a strange tingle on her tongue. The feast carried on, loud and restless. Music swelled, laughter clattered against stone, and wolves shifted uneasily under candlelight. But halfway through the night, the room began to blur at the edges for Lyri. The colors dulled. Her limbs felt heavy. She reached for her cup of water and missed it. The metal clattered against the table. Lyri? Kaelin's voice was low, alarm slicing through the din. What is it? Her vision swam. The air grew thick. Her throat burned. I don't know, she whispered, swaying. Her hand brushed the table, finding his fingers cold and strong. Then her knees gave way. Kaelin caught her before she hit the floor. The hall erupted in motion, servants rushing forward, courtiers rising in panic. But the king's roar froze them all. Out! The command carried the power of an alpha's fury, brooking no refusal. The hall emptied in heartbeats. He lifted her easily, her head lolling against his chest. Her skin was clammy, her pulse faint and erratic. A thin sheen of sweat coated her brow, and her lips were tinged gray-blue. She's been poisoned, he said through clenched teeth. Erend appeared in the doorway, pale. How? Wolfsbane, Kaelin hissed. I can smell it. Erend blanched. For a human, it's fatal. Kaelin's expression was pure steel. Not if I can help it. He carried her to his chambers, every step echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. The moment the door closed, he laid her on the bed, brushing the hair from her face. Her breathing came shallow, strained. Her body trembled with fever. Stay with me, he whispered. Do you hear me, Leary? Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. Kaelin, don't speak, he ordered, though his own voice trembled. She smiled weakly. You're afraid. He froze. Of losing you, yes. Her eyes closed again. Then don't. The simple plea broke something inside him. He turned to Erend, who stood grim at the door. The healers can't help her, the beta said. You know that. Kaelin's jaw tightened. I can. Erend's eyes widened.
No.
You'll kill yourself. Kaelin looked down at Leary's still form, the only light in his darkness, and shook his head. If she dies, I die with her. There's no choice. He knelt beside the bed, pressing his forehead to her hand. Forgive me, he murmured, then closed his eyes and reached deep, past flesh, past pain, into the well of cursed power that had been his prison. The curse surged, furious at being disturbed. Pain exploded through him, searing his veins like molten iron. His body convulsed, his breath shattering into gasps. The black veins crawled up his neck, across his face. Erend shouted, but his voice was distant. Kaelin clung to one thought, Leary's heartbeat. Weak, fading. He gathered his strength and forced his wolf to rise. The pain doubled, trebled, until it was unbearable. He roared, half human, half beast, as bones cracked and fur tore through skin. The curse fought to twist the transformation, to turn him into the monstrous thing it had always threatened to make. But this time, something else pushed back, something bright and fierce that wasn't his own power. Leary's hand, trembling, reached for him. Even unconscious, she felt him, their strange, shared bond awakening fully. Light flared from her palm, golden and soft. It spilled through the air, wrapping around the dark energy that poured from him, soothing it, reshaping it. His cry changed, less agony, more release. The curse screamed, a sound that wasn't sound at all but fury itself, then shattered like glass beneath a hammer. When the silence fell, it was absolute. When Kaelin finally opened his eyes, the pain was gone. For the first time in 5 years, he felt whole. His wolf was no longer a cage of fire, but a living part of him, powerful, loyal, free. He looked down at Leary. Her breathing had steadied. Her color was returning. The poison had burned away, replaced by warmth that radiated from where their hands were joined. He realized what she had done, what they had done together. The curse was broken. But as joy surged through him, another feeling followed, sharper and deeper. Possession. He had nearly lost her, and the thought alone was unbearable. His wolf rose within him, primal and certain. She was his. When dawn finally broke, Frostmark Fortress awoke to a silence that felt different, lighter, stranger, as though the air itself no longer trembled beneath the weight of an unseen curse. The guards who passed through the lower halls could not name what had changed, only that something ancient and heavy had lifted. In the king's chambers, the fire had long burned low. Kaelin sat at the edge of the bed, his bare back marked by fading black lines that no longer pulsed with pain. Leary slept peacefully for the first time in days, her hand still tangled with his. He had not moved from her side since the poison had left her veins. He had dreamed of wolves, his wolves, running free across endless snow, unbound by agony. When he woke, he realized the dream was not a dream at all. He could feel them again. Their hearts, their loyalty, their song. For 5 years, that link had been muted, severed by the curse. Now it throbbed alive in his chest, warm and whole. She did this, he whispered. Erend stood by the door, silent, as though afraid to disturb the moment. The healers say she'll live. Kaelin nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. No healer could have done this. He rose and crossed to the window. Outside, dawnlight caught the mountains like molten silver. He could feel his wolf pacing inside him, strong, hungry, alive. For the first time in so long, it did not tear at his mind. It waited, calm, expectant. He turned back to Leary. She freed us both. Errand hesitated. And what will you do now, my king? Kalen's expression hardened, but a faint smile touched his lips. Now I will make sure no one ever touches her again. When Leary woke, the first thing she saw was him. Not the grim, distant king she'd come to know, but a man transformed. The gray in his eyes gleamed with life, his presence no longer weighed down by pain. The curse's shadow was gone. Kalen. Her voice was soft, uncertain. He turned from the fire, his gaze warm and sharp at once. You should rest. I feel different. She sat up slowly, frowning. What happened? You saved me, he said simply. She shook her head. No, You did. He stepped closer, kneeling before her so their eyes met. Whatever power lives in you, whatever gift you carry, it reached through the darkness and tore the curse apart. You risked your life for me. His voice softened. No one has ever done that. Leary's breath caught. I couldn't do nothing. He smiled faintly. You never could. The air between them thickened, full of words neither dared speak. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering against her skin. For years, he had felt only pain in his touch. Now there was only warmth. Leary, he murmured, I owe you everything. She shook her head, tears bright in her eyes. You owe me nothing. But he was already leaning closer, his forehead resting against hers, his voice barely above a whisper. Then let me give you something else instead. He kissed her. The world fell away. The cold, the castle, the endless years of suffering. They all melted into the fire that flared between them. His hand slid to the back of her neck, holding her gently, as though she were the first thing in years he didn't want to break. When they finally parted, both were breathless. You're not afraid of me? He asked. She smiled, small and fierce. You're the only thing in this place I'm not afraid of. Something primal flashed behind his eyes. The wolf inside him, freed at last, stirred with instinctive recognition. The bond between them deepened, an invisible thread woven of magic, blood, and will. He drew in a breath, fighting to steady himself. There's something I must do, he said. Something the pack must see. The sun had barely reached its peak when the horn sounded. Every wolf in Frostmark gathered in the great courtyard, called by a power they could not ignore. They found their king waiting at the center, standing tall, his aura burning brighter than it had in years. The cold air hummed with energy. Beside him stood Leary, wrapped in a cloak of white fur. Her human scent mixed with his, their connection impossible to miss. Kareth and his followers stood near the edge of the crowd, their faces carefully neutral. Only Kareth's eyes betrayed the fury beneath. Kalen's voice carried over the assembled wolves. 5 years ago, I was cursed. My pain became your burden, my silence your fear. I ruled by will alone, half a king, half a beast. He paused, scanning the crowd. That time is over. The murmurs grew. Power rippled outward from him, strong, clean, untainted. For the first time in living memory, they felt the alpha's dominance without pain attached. It was awe-inspiring, terrifying, and beautiful. Kareth stepped forward. And what freed you, my king?
Tell us that.
Tell your people what broke your chains. Kalen's gaze turned sharp as winter steel. She did. He reached for Leary's hand and pulled her forward. The pack gasped. This woman, this human, has done what none of you could. She faced the curse that bound me, and through her courage and her heart, she shattered it. Her strength is not in the claw or fang, but it is power all the same. Power enough to save your king. Kareth's jaw tightened. You mean to tell us you let a mortal wield your fate? I mean to tell you, Kalen said, his voice a growl that rolled like thunder, that she is my fate. And before the entire court, He turned to Leary and brushed his fingers against her throat, just above her pulse. His wolf rose within him, and in one fluid motion, he leaned forward and pressed his canines to her skin, marking her gently. Not to wound, but to claim. A hush swept through the courtyard, followed by a resonant vibration, the collective hum of pack instinct answering their alpha's call. The bond was sacred, irreversible. "She is my mate," Kalen declared, his voice echoing across the stone. "My Luna, my queen." The crowd erupted in howls, some of loyalty, some of shock, others of rage. But the sound was swallowed by the mountain wind, and above it all stood Kalen and Leary, united, unshaken. Kareth turned away, his teeth bared in silent fury. He would not challenge the claim now, but his silence promised a reckoning. That night, as the fortress quieted, Leary stood on the balcony outside their shared chamber, the mark at her neck warm beneath the moonlight. Kalen joined her, his arms slipping easily around her waist. "You realize what you've done," he said quietly. "They'll never forget it." "I don't want them to," she replied. "Let them remember that a human could stand beside a wolf." He smiled, resting his chin atop her head. "You've changed everything." She turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "And you've finally stopped hiding." His smile deepened, softer now. "I had something worth showing." The wind swept through the balcony, carrying the faint sound of wolves howling in the distance. Not of fear this time, but of unity. And though the night was cold, for the first time in years, Frostmark felt alive. The echo of that night's howls carried far beyond Frostmark's walls. By dawn, messengers rode through the mountain passes to distant packs. By dusk, every den and keep in the north knew the impossible truth. Their cursed king had risen again, his wolf restored, and his mate was human.
Some called it blasphemy.
Others a miracle. But among the old bloodlines, the news landed like a spark in a powder keg. The High Lords whispered that the Alpha had been bewitched. They saw weakness where Kalen saw strength, and they began to plan. 3 nights after the declaration, Leary woke to the sound of shouting in the courtyard below. She rushed to the balcony, her white robe billowing in the cold wind. Down in the torchlit snow, 2 wolves tore into each other, fur and blood blurring into one violent motion. Around them, soldiers shouted, but did not interfere. It was no brawl. It was a challenge. Aaron's voice rang out. "Stand down," by the king's command. But one wolf, massive and gray, threw the other aside and shifted midair, landing on 2 feet. The form of Lord Kareth emerged, blood streaking his jaw, eyes burning with hatred. "Call him out," Kareth roared. "If he still calls himself Alpha, let him fight for it." The cry echoed against the stone walls. A challenge to the death. Leary's heart slammed against her ribs. She turned and found Kalen already at the doorway, fully dressed, his sword slung across his back. The fury in his eyes was calm. Too calm. "Don't," she whispered, moving toward him. "It's a trap." He reached for her hand, kissed it once, and let go. "Then I'll end it." The courtyard was a ring of fire and frost. Wolves circled in silence as their king descended the steps, every movement slow, deliberate, final. When he stepped into the ring opposite Kareth, the tension in the air snapped taut like a bowstring. "I warned you," Kalen said, voice steady. "You could have stayed loyal. You chose this instead." Kareth spat blood into the snow. "You chose her. You've doomed us all to kneel under a human's rule." "Then rise and stop me," Kalen growled. He dropped the sword to the ground. It clattered once against the stones and shifted. The transformation this time was smooth as breath. No pain, no black veins, no scream. His wolf form surged forward, enormous, for dark as iron, eyes burning silver. The pack gasped. They had never seen him like this, free. Kareth shifted too, his wolf pale and scarred, snarling through broken teeth. The 2 circled each other once, twice. Then they collided. The sound was thunder. Leary stood at the edge of the ring, flanked by Aaron and a dozen guards. She could feel every impact through the frozen ground. Each clash of fang and claw sent a jolt through her chest. The crowd's growls rose in rhythm with the fight. Kaelin fought like a storm given shape. Every movement precise, relentless. But Kareth was cunning. He darted back, drawing Kaelin toward the edge of the ring where shadow hid the waiting traitors, wolves loyal to him alone. Lyri saw them move before anyone else did. "Behind you," she cried. Kaelin turned too late. One of the wolves lunged from the dark, striking him across the flank. The scent of blood hit the air, sharp, shocking. The others rushed in. Aaron drew his blade, shouting, "Protect the king!" Chaos erupted. Lyri didn't think. She ran. Through the circle of wolves, through the snow, she pushed toward Kaelin as Kareth's traitors closed in. Her heart hammered, but the strange calm she had always carried flared bright again, no longer a whisper of empathy, but a surge of power. As she reached him, she threw herself between Kaelin and the nearest attacker. Her hands hit the wolf's chest, and light exploded outward. Golden fire, pure, brilliant, impossible, swept across the courtyard. Wolves howled and staggered back as the energy rippled through them, disarming their rage like a sudden frost. Every movement stopped. The golden light faded into soft motes, floating like embers. The wolves blinked, dazed, their fury extinguished. Only Kareth still stood, snarling, eyes wild. Lyri turned toward him, her voice low but unshaking. "It's over." He laughed, broken and furious. "You've bewitched them all, you filthy." Kaelin struck before he finished. His wolf lunged, faster than sight, and pinned Kareth beneath him. The snow hissed with blood. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Kaelin stepped back, human once more, chest heaving. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "I gave you every chance, uncle." Kareth lay still, defeated but alive. Kaelin looked to the soldiers. "Take him to the wastes. Let the cold have him." The guards obeyed. When silence fell again, all eyes turned to Lyri. She stood in the center of the courtyard, breath misting in the air, light still flickering faintly around her hands. The wolves who had attacked now knelt instinctively, heads bowed. Kaelin crossed to her, shifting back as he moved. His bare feet left dark prints in the snow. He took her face in his hands. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I only wanted to stop the fighting." He stared at her for a long time, then smiled, the rare, unguarded kind that reached his eyes. "You've done more than that. You've given them peace." The pack knelt as one, howling softly in unison, a song not of battle, but of surrender and unity. Aaron stepped forward, his expression odd. "My king," they answered to her now as well. Kaelin looked around at the kneeling wolves, his arms still wrapped around Lyri. "Then let them learn what kind of rule compassion brings." That night, Frostmark's fires burned bright enough to turn the snow gold. The war was over before it began. And yet, as Kaelin stood beside his mate, he couldn't shake the faint tremor that ran through the bond between them. Her power, whatever it was, had awakened fully, vast and untamed. It had saved them today. But he knew the truth. Magic that strong always demanded something in return. And he feared what the cost might be. Winter lingered in the high peaks, but Frostmark's courtyards no longer felt haunted. Wolves sparred in the training rings again. Merchants returned to the gates. The hallways that had echoed with silence now carried laughter. The pack was alive. To the people, it was the human queen who had brought the thaw. They whispered her name with reverence, calling her Lyri, the light-touched. They spoke of how her hands had calmed the beast, how her voice had stilled the cursed storm. For once, she did not shy from their stares. She smiled, even as the glow in her palms began to flicker at odd hours, even when no one was hurt. At first, she hid it. The golden shimmer would bloom under her skin, dancing through her veins like sunlight through glass. It was beautiful and wrong. The warmth that had once soothed now burned. Each time she used her gift, it took longer for the pain to fade. Kaelin noticed before she confessed. They were walking the ramparts one morning, watching the auroras ribbon across the pale sky. He reached for her hand and frowned. "You're trembling."
Awaken.
"You're lying." She sighed, turning to face him. "It's nothing serious. Just it feels stronger now. Harder to control." He studied her, his expression darkening. "You said the same before you nearly collapsed during the battle. That was different. I was protecting you." He caught her shoulders gently, but firmly. "Then promise me you won't do it again." Leary's eyes searched his. "And if it means saving you?" He hesitated. "Then I would rather fall than lose you to it." The air between them shimmered with the weight of things unsaid. He kissed her forehead, holding her close as though his arms alone could shield her from whatever force lived inside her. That night, she dreamed of a voice. It whispered from beneath the ice, smooth and old and patient. "Little light," it said, "you carry what was taken. You carry what was mine." Leary woke drenched in sweat, the mark on her neck searing with heat. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire, but she could feel it, the same dark pulse she had once felt in Kaelin's curse, faint, searching. She rose, wrapping herself in her cloak, and crept through the corridor to the royal library. The guards didn't stop her. Few dared question their queen now. The library smelled of parchment and cold dust. Moonlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating shelves older than the fortress itself. She found Aaron there, as she often did, awake and reading by a dying candle. "My lady," he said, surprised. "I need to know what kind of magic could curse a king," she said. "And what kind of power could undo it?" The beta hesitated. "The records speak of a blood witch, yes, but they also speak of a pact. Kaelin's pain wasn't just a curse, it was a seal. The witch bound her own power into him, so that it could never die. When you broke the curse, you may have taken her place," Leary finished quietly. Aaron's eyes filled with reluctant sympathy. "Magic, that ancient, doesn't vanish, my queen. It transfers. It finds a new vessel strong enough to bear it." Her stomach dropped. "Then it's inside me now." He nodded. "I fear so." By morning, she had made her decision. She didn't tell Kaelin. He would have forbidden it. Instead, she slipped away at dawn, riding a white mare down the mountain pass toward the frozen ravine known as the Mirror Vale, where, legend said, the blood which had died. The world there was silent, carved from frost and shadow. The lake at its center was frozen solid, its surface gleaming like glass. Beneath it, dark shapes shifted, as though something vast and waiting moved below. Leary stepped onto the ice. Her reflection rippled, warping into something older, something watching. "You come seeking release," the whisper breathed, rising from the depths. "But light cannot exist without a vessel." Leary's breath clouded in the cold air. "Then take it back. Take your power, take your curse, whatever this is, and leave me whole." The voice laughed softly, a sound like cracking ice. "You misunderstand. It was never mine to give. You were chosen long before the Wolf King ever suffered. The light and the shadow are the same song sung by different throats. You ended one half, and so the other woke." The ice beneath her feet fractured. Golden light spilled from the cracks, followed by a rush of dark smoke. She fell to her knees, clutching her head as the two forces collided inside her, fire and frost, light and shadow. Her scream tore across the valley, shaking the trees. Far above, in the fortress, Kaelin staggered mid-stride as pain slammed through their bond. His wolf howled in panic. "Leary," he gasped, already running for the stables. "Errand with me." By the time he reached the Mirror Vale, the sky was split by auroras of gold and black. Leary knelt at the lake center, surrounded by cracks that glowed like veins of molten glass. The light poured from her eyes, her mouth, her hands. Around her, the shadow coiled, trying to swallow her whole. "Leary," he shouted. She turned toward him, eyes blazing like twin suns. "It's inside me, Kaelin. I can't hold it." He sprinted onto the ice, ignoring the way it shattered under his boots. "You're not alone. You never were." "It's too much," she whispered. I can't stop it from consuming everything. He reached her, gripping her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Then let it consume us both. She shook her head wildly. You'll die. Better than living without you. The dark energy surged upward, wrapping around them like a storm. Kalen pressed his forehead to hers, pouring all his strength, his love, his wolf's fierce devotion through the bond. The curse met the light, and for a heartbeat, they were suspended between destruction and salvation. Then everything exploded into silence. When the storm cleared, the lake was still. The cracks in the ice had fused into faint golden lines, as though light itself had been woven into the frozen surface. Kalen knelt beside Lyri's motionless body, tears freezing on his cheeks. Please, he whispered. Please wake up. For a long time there was no sound. Then her hand twitched. Her eyes opened, no longer burning gold, but clear, human blue. It's gone, she murmured. The darkness, it's gone. Kalen pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as the first snow of dawn began to fall. The valley was quiet again, but in that silence, he felt it, the faint hum of her heartbeat against his. And beneath it, something new. Not magic, not curse, balance. Light and wolf. Human and king. Two halves finally whole. Spring arrived on silent pause, softening the snow that had blanketed Frostmark for generations. The rivers cracked open, their frozen throats singing again, and green shoots pushed through soil that had long lain barren. The mountains were still crowned with ice, but the fortress below them no longer felt like a monument to sorrow. It pulsed with life. Lyri and Kalen returned to the city on horseback, side by side. The journey down from Mirrorvale had taken 2 days, though to both it felt like an eternity and a heartbeat all at once. Lyri had slept often, her body still weak, but when she was awake she smiled, quietly, fiercely, as though she carried sunlight behind her ribs. The wolves who saw them approach fell to their knees. Word had spread already. The valley had glowed for hours that morning, a pillar of light visible from every tower, every outpost. The omen was clear. The curse that had haunted their bloodlines was gone. When the gates opened, the entire court waited. Aaron stood at the front, his face split with a grin that softened years of battle weariness. The gods themselves could not have scripted your return, he said as they dismounted. You've brought the dawn with you. Then let's make sure it stays, Kalen replied. Inside the great hall, for the first time in memory, the throne room was warm. Fires burned bright in every brazier, throwing gold light across the banners that lined the walls. The sigil of the Frostmark wolves, once black and foreboding, had been repainted in silver and white, a symbol of rebirth. Lyri stood at Kalen's side as he addressed the gathered nobles. Her hair shimmered like copper fire in the torchlight, and the faint scar at her throat, the mark of his claim, glowed softly beneath her collar. When she spoke, her voice carried through the chamber with the steady grace of a queen who had earned her crown, not been handed it. Our world was built on strength, she said, on the belief that power comes from domination. But strength is not only claw and fang. It is the courage to protect, the compassion to heal, and the will to endure even when everything tells you to surrender. We have all endured. Now it is time to build. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Respect, agreement, awe. Even the most hardened warriors lowered their heads. Kalen stepped forward then, his arms slipping around her waist. For too long, our people have lived by fear. I ruled through it once. It was all I knew. But fear builds nothing. Fear binds. Love frees. He turned to his council. From this day, Frostmark will no longer shut its gates to outsiders. The border treaties will open again. Humans and shifters will trade freely across our lands. The kingdom we build now will not belong to wolves alone, but to all who have the heart to stand beside us. Aaron knelt first, pounding his fist against his chest. For the king and the Luna. The hall followed, a thunderous chorus. For the king and the Luna. Lyri blinked rapidly, overwhelmed, and Kalen leaned in to murmur against her ear. You see? They finally howl for you. She smiled. They always did. You just had to listen. That evening, the fortress transformed into a celebration. Torches blazed along the walls, and the courtyards were filled with song. Wolves danced in both their forms, shifting in ribbons of silver light beneath the auroras. For the first time in centuries, the mountain echoed with laughter instead of war cries. Kaelin found Lyri standing alone on the balcony, overlooking the valley. Her gown was pale gold, a color she once would have thought too bold for her, and the wind played through her hair like fingers. When she turned, her smile held that same steady warmth that had first drawn him out of his shell of stone. "Do you remember," he said softly, stepping beside her, "the night you first arrived here?" "How could I forget?" she said, laughing lightly. "You looked at me as though I were a broken sword someone had left on your doorstep." He chuckled. "I thought you'd shatter." "And you almost did," she teased, bumping his arm. He caught her hand, turning serious again. "You changed everything, Lyri. You broke a curse no one else could touch. You saved me, and not just from the magic, but from myself." Her gaze softened. "And you showed me what it means to fight for something worth bleeding for." They stood in silence then, watching the auroras dance across the sky, gold and silver weaving together like threads. Below them, the pack held a new song, one not of mourning or power, but of belonging. The voices of wolves and humans mingled, laughter blending with music, and for the first time, Frostmark felt like home. Months passed. The peace held. The alliance between humans and wolves flourished, fragile but real. Trade routes reopened. Young wolves studied under human healers, and human farmers found refuge in the mountain villages. The line between their worlds blurred, as if nature itself had been waiting for this union. And then, one morning, the bells rang. Not for war, but for joy. Lyri sat in the sunlight of their chamber, her hands resting lightly over the gentle swell of her belly. Kaelin knelt beside her, his face a mixture of awe and fear and fierce tenderness. He placed a hand over hers, feeling the faintest flutter beneath her skin, the first heartbeat of something new. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." She nodded, eyes bright with tears. "Half wolf, half human. Proof that we can be more than what we were born to be." He pressed his forehead against hers, smiling through his tears. "He'll change the world again." "Or she," Lyri said with mock sternness. "Or she," he agreed, laughing. Outside, the pack gathered once more in the courtyard, howls rising in harmony, a chorus that seemed to shake the mountains themselves. The air shimmered with life, with promise, with legacy. Kaelin lifted his head, his voice carrying through the open balcony. "To our future," he said. Lyri's hand found his, fingers entwined. "To a world that remembers what we built." And beneath the northern lights, the human queen and the wolf king stood together, not as symbols of a broken past, but as the living bond of a kingdom reborn. In the end, the cursed king found his light, and the human girl no one wanted became the heartbeat of a kingdom. Together, they rewrote the laws of their world, proving that even in the coldest places, love can thaw the oldest curses. Maybe that's the real magic, not power, not blood, but two souls who refuse to give up on each other, even when the world tells them they should. If this story stirred something in you, that ache, that hope, that little flicker of wild love, don't forget to subscribe for more dark fantasy tales where danger, destiny, and devotion collide. Until next time, may your heart stay fierce, your soul stay free, and may